Welcome to Feeling Seen, the podcast about the movies that make us feel seen. Today, my co-host is multi-time Academy Award nominee in documentary and narrative. We have filmmaker, photographer, academic artist, and writer RaMell Ross. You may have seen his directorial debut, Hale County This Morning, This Evening, an experimental documentary about Black life in Hale County, Alabama. And if you have not already, you must see his most recent directorial work, the 2024 historical drama Nickel Boys, based on the novel of the same name by Colson Whitehead. Nickel Boys is nominated for Best Picture at this year's Oscars, and RaMell Ross and co-writer Joslyn Barnes are both nominated for Best Adapted Screenplay. It is truly a fantastic film. You can watch it right now, and if you're in a bigger market where there are more theaters around, I highly recommend catching it in a theater. It's nominated for Best Picture, so it's still kind of kicking around there in multiplexes. Go find this one and immerse yourself in it in big format if you can. Let's get into our conversation with RaMell. We are talking about Nickel Boys, Spike Lee, and his 1992 biographical drama, Malcolm X. I want to say my normal intro is what else do the people need to know about you before we get started, but I know that you have academic credentials that I didn't want to I didn't know it was the most current or the most accurate way to characterize that, because I know it can be kind of specific associate professor titles, chairs. How about you tell us what your life in academia is classified as?
No, thank you for asking. I am an associate professor of visual art at Brown University.
Okay. And a thing I really I liked about your interview with Vulture, Bilga Abiri there at Vulture. Well, and you mentioned in that article how when Nickel Boys, when the path of you and Nickel Boys was coming together, you weren't necessarily you weren't trying to go out of your way to compromise to be the one to make this movie. And there's a part in speaking with Bilga where you're like, I'm a teacher. I'm happy. And I like the life that I have here. And you're like, I don't like email. I will get back to you my own time kind of thing. And I appreciated that kind of if I can do this in a way, if I can make this movie in a way that is a value add to it and me, yes. And it's interesting to read a response like that in an industry that can feel so at any cost. In any way I can, incredibly competitively, my shot to make this thing. So I feel like you came in, you made a unique film coming in with a unique sort of mindset in your approach to getting to make a beautiful, beautiful, dramatic film put out across the country for people to see.
Man, I appreciate that, Jordan. It's strange because the way in which I talk about the way my life is and the decisions I make, they just can't work for everyone, and they don't work for everyone. Sometimes you have to just make the thing and you have to get out there and make it happen. Very fortunate to be in relative control of the jobs that I take because the support of the academy. But yeah, on your own terms is the best way because you're fully comfortable in it, and you can. I personally think you can accept the way that it's received. If you're doing your thing.
I had a completely tangential question I did want to get to early, knowing your love of basketball. I did want to ask if you had an urgent thought on the Luka for Anthony Davis trade, where Anthony is now at the Mavs and Doncic is now at the Lakers, in what seems like an inexplicable lack of assets in return for a generational franchise face such as Luka Doncic.
Yeah. It took everyone by surprise. Probably even Luka, maybe.
Yeah, I think it took Luka and Anthony Davis and even LeBron James very much by surprise.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that there's not a couple personal relationships on the Mavs that he has with folks that are just so explicitly or implicitly toxic that it just didn't matter. Obviously all the information we have is not the information that is why it happened.
I'm so looking forward to the HBO miniseries on this.
Yeah. The 30 for 30, that's just, yeah.
It's going to be a TikTok. It's going to be it happened so fast. It's just going to be a TikTok of how things went.
Just like the old school Vine, a 5-second video.
It feels not entirely inappropriate given the affinity for basketball that the director behind the movie you have brought for us to discuss today, a towering work of American cinema, Malcolm X.
Right. But also it's this is such a lovely podcast and a lovely prompt because it really makes you think. I had so much difficulty doing this. I'm
I
like,
hope it doesn't feel like homework to people. I hope it feels like even if a difficult, perhaps a fun, enriching exercise to consider.
I think so. I think you make even someone, at least like me, question what it means to identify with a character. If I'm going to speak on someone that I connect to in the character, protagonist, antagonist, cinematic way, like who am I willing to put myself in the shadow of, or who do I believe to be some sort of proxy for how I've come to age? It's really challenging. Like I went to cartoons immediately. I was like Bart Simpson.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
should I say Mr. Bean because he's funny and I kind of see myself as a goofy guy. I like physical humor. But yeah, I'm glad. I appreciate the prompt.
Well, no, because it becomes like you said it like what does representation in this like in what does it mean? But also like what do I want to choose for the way that I could talk about this? Because
Yeah.
often we'll have these where like somebody will pick a central character, but then it will come up that like I was so close to picking this one person, and on the recent episode with Sophie Thatcher, we ended up talking about Liza Minnelli as the core character, but her alternate that she was first initially hung up on was Angela Chase from My So-Called Life, which couldn't be more different than
Yeah.
Liza
Yeah.
Minnelli in that movie. So it's like, God, how do I pick between these two extremely different tributaries to my personality?
Yeah. I really love this quote or this like little thought piece by that guy Alan Watts. And he's like, the boat is moving through the water, and it would be silly to look at the wake and think that the wake is what's pushing the boat. But according to linearity in the way in which, we believe in the order of operations, one could presume that what comes before produces what comes after. So it kind of reorients the cause and effect. And I say that because when you give me this prompt, I start to think about what narrative of myself I'm trying to reinforce. Like, am I really connecting with this evil villain? And I'm like, nah, I don't want to say that because it's a darker side of me that I barely acknowledge. It's like a really, really fun thing to think around.
I have long wanted to do like just like a spin-off or a kid that's just villains that with people giving their
Yeah,
villain edit. And yeah, am I Leighton Meester in The Roommate? Is the dark side of me like a single white female kind of character? It sure is, and
yeah,
I have to
yeah.
be willing to admit that and accept that.
Maybe me too. Maybe I have to. Maybe that's the same for I.
Now what was your first watch of Malcolm X?
I hesitated with the Malcolm X. I'll start with because he's like such a historical figure that has so much influence and such a powerful. And like I wholly see myself as almost oppositional to that, like a very
Hmm.
normal person that like has very specific loves. But I think the first watch of Malcolm X was, I'm gonna like take a quick detour. There's this Roots album, and maybe I think it's called Undone, and there's a line in it that's like a lot of people go to prison and not everyone comes out Malcolm X.
A lot of niggas go to prison. How many come out Malcolm X? I know I'm not shit, can't even talk about the rest. Famous last words, you under arrest. Will I get popped tonight? It's anybody's guess, I guess. Nigga need to stay cunning. I guess when the cops coming, need to start running. I won't make the same mistakes from my last running. You either done doing crime now or you done in.
Which is really, really deep, right? Like it speaks to the lack of reform that is the prison system, but also the way that people kind of assume that, you know, it's really possible to scale your childhood experiences with a mentor or like with a single person in one's life. Like all you need to do is just go to college, son, and like you can be the next. It's like, can you really? Like
Mhm.
based on the way that there's enough space for those people and the way that people's brains actually work. But watching the Malcolm X powerful, powerful film was like such an exploration of the sort of caterpillar to butterfly, like how someone can truly, even in their later years. Though I don't think Malcolm X went to prison when he was, super, super old, but he was definitely, I think, like in his 20s or something.
Mhm.
How you can completely be reborn as a new and continue to move forward. Like he goes through being relatively militant to being passive. And like all of these changes are something that I really am attached to, I think, for myself.
I don't know what I would say to Allah. Have you ever bent your knees, Malcolm?
Yes, when I was picking a lock to rob someone's house.
Tell Allah that. You can grovel and crawl for sin, but not to save your soul. Pick the lock, Malcolm. Pick it.
I want to. God knows I want to.
It's like nothing better than to continue to grow, for lack of a better word.
One of like the great sort of like present that I get from this podcast is even with movies, if I have seen them before, I get the chance to rewatch them through like trying to think as best I can through the, reading interviews with people and watching something through the lens of what they have presented it to me as. And so watching this, like I was really, the beginning of the movie, which starts with the archival footage of the beating of Rodney King, the like hand cam footage. And then the movie concludes as well with this like kind of almost like somewhat fantastical, it feels like, combination of like archival and street like protest of solidarity around Malcolm X and Nelson Mandela talking to a classroom of children like not too long after he was freed from prison in South Africa.
I am Malcolm X. I am Malcolm X. I am Malcolm X. I am Malcolm X. I am Malcolm X.
As Brother Malcolm said, we declare our right on this earth to be a man, to be a human being, to be given the rights of a human being, to be respected as a human being in this society, on this earth, in this day, which we intend to bring into existence.
By any means necessary.
And I was thinking, of course, of the archival footage in your film as well. And we have in Malcolm X these sort of like these epic moments that we're watching play out in archival history. And then reading interviews with you and hearing you talk about the day-to-day and almost the banality of things that you wanted to capture in a lot of your archival footage. And I as somebody who went on to employ very strategically archival footage in their own film, I sort of wanted to hear about you talk of its use in Malcolm X, perhaps, and your use of it in Nickel Boys.
Well, I love that comparison. And I haven't watched Malcolm X in many, many, many years. And so you're refreshing my memory as to the way in which it's framed, which is quite contemporary. We sort of slip into history. I think that the archival footage in Spike Lee's Malcolm X is like very illustrative, right? Like it is telling you about a time period. It's supposed to be very positivist. It's like, this is what happened and this is how you should feel. And I think that's like needed for that story. Like it's giving you the historical context and giving you sort of these markers of events that show you that this is a web of events, and like this one is connected to this one. Like they're not completely separate. And this cinema here is elevating this story to, of course, the annals of cinema, but it's rooted in this sort of truth that is evidenced through this archival. I love that you used banal for the imagery, archival imagery in Nickel Boys, because I'm like been working with this idea of the epic banal, and that there are epic moments in like sheer detailed and sort of nuanced observation of things that can become these symbolic moments that attach to one's narrative, or they can just be, a metaphor for something that's interesting to one, but it's also just an experience of looking. So it takes on this grander meaning. I love that idea in the archive, right? Like the archive is to me, a really fraught space in which, to most people who think about the archive, in which there's like a very specific sort of teleology of the person who's filming, and like the images are super utilitarian, and people are less people and more tools for the idea that the person with the camera is directing towards. And there's often moments in these archives in which you really see the person. Like someone trips or they drop a cup of coffee and they look around really fast and then they like pop back into that statistic, and kind of like want to pull those moments to sort of rescue people from that utility that sometimes the archive can squish someone into.
And as I was reading interviews with you, you mentioned like the archival. You like I don't normally quote people back to themselves, but I want to do a comparison here, where you refer to the archival as you says that it is sort of in the purpose of to alter our interactions with white-owned historical record with which the
Mm,
film is contending. And then I was reading Bell Hooks's essay in Art Forum from 1993 on Malcolm X, a movie she did not particularly care for at all. And she says, but there's a quote up at the top, which is sort of tone setting for the rest thing, where she says, in a field of representation that has always remained a plantation culture where Black images are concerned, Malcolm X has been turned into a commodity. And
mm,
I just thought that expression of a field of representation that has always remained a plantation culture where Black images are concerned, and you talking about the historical record with which your film and Black representation contends was such an interesting link to her processing of Malcolm X and your creation and
yeah,
expression of what footage is meant to accomplish in your own movie.
that deep research. That's what I'm talking about. We are here.
I did not want to slack off for an associate professor at Brown working in visual arts.
And no, you're right on the money with the almost the built-in contradictions of representation, or like,
Mhm.
sort of the difficulties of contending with the history, while also trying to carve out space for it not to come across as monolithic, or to come across as pandering to the narratives that already exist about the way in which our skin is consumed, or capitalized upon. There's a famous quote also by Bell Hooks, that the only site for resistance, essentially she's saying, against this plantation mode, is the Black Family Archive,
Mm.
because this is where images are made outside of the dictations of what it means to be Black. It's more, I'm connecting with a loved one, I'm photographing these interstitial moments. And so in Nickel Boys, we draw from the vast places in which Black people are represented, including the Black Family Archive, to kind of give you these markers for the different ways in which Black people have encountered the camera and lens. I remember now that Bell Hooks didn't like Malcolm X, and because of that reason, that it was a commodity. But like,
She's rather scathing in that art form piece.
yeah, yeah, she doesn't hold back, and she's also right, but she's also wrong. Like, I think that there's a beautiful kind of like pendulum swing between that type of criticality and the need for it, but then also the notion that almost any representation by a Black person of a Black person is contributing to the larger archive of representations that's giving us the full swath that can then be equal to the range of representations for other ethnicities, or specifically quote unquote white culture.
It made me think of the Carol Clover's book Men, Women, and Chainsaws, which in the it's a piece about like I feel like sort of I just boil it down to like male identification with the female heroine due to her masculinization in particularly the 80s slasher subset of horror film,
Whoa.
and how women and men respond to that trope of the final girl. And in her first edition of the book, she was incredibly critical of Ripley in Alien, did not like
Mm,
that
mm,
character. Pretty much tore her down, read James Cameron for filth kind of situation, or Ridley Scott, and just wasn't impressed at all. But then when she released, and not that Bell Hooks would have taken it back, but in a later edition of the book, with time behind her, and I would imagine
mm,
a buildup of additional films since then, and seeing, I would imagine, the ripple effect of how Ripley went on to help create other female protagonists that broke from the conventions that were sort of strictly defined within the final girl of the slasher. She
mm.
was kind of like, I was a little hard on Ripley before and have kind of come around, which again, is not me saying Bell Hooks would have changed her mind, but I think it's an immediate criticism is so sticky because the immediate read on something in the immediate context with which it exists without seeing how time treats it or how it fits into the greater body of work that is similarly representing what it does is like, it has to be limited, because to revisit something is to understand its timeliness or its lack of timeliness, and maybe it was just a one-off that wasn't super hot.
It's true. It's true. It's like that Chinese proverb where it's like, guy brings home a horse and they're like, oh, that's great, you got a horse. And then the horse runs away and it's like, you shouldn't have got a horse. And it brings back a horse and it's like, that's good. And then the kid rides a horse, breaks a leg, that's bad. And then they conscript him for the army. And then, he can't go to the army. So that's good. It's like only time tells. I think specifically with criticism and its relationship to the way in which something will be accepted in the future, I think it's quite difficult because it's almost implying that what we are experiencing now isn't actually producing the change in the future. Right.
Right.
I think it's that the way that we're pushing back now against the things is contingent, and it's part of that alchemy that then lets it be okay in the future. Like we can't even deal with the complexity of that entropy. Like would be, it's really, really, really challenging. But I think and not to switch topics, but it goes to the Malcolm X as well, because his character is absolute in every stage of life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the way it is. Like, I got to be a hustler. There is nothing better. He goes to jail. I got to be quiet. I got to learn. I got to do this. I got to be Muslim. And he continues to change. And there's something just so human about a deep belief in the moment, being the best way to live, because you're using all of your experience of the past to survive and to feel present in the moment.
Well, okay. And so to you, when you were saying like, do I pick Bart Simpson like that? Like, do I like first going to animated characters? That's something that we've talked about on this podcast with previous guests, of feeling first or most convicted about picking an animated character because they, particularly as non-white folks or perhaps queer folks, did not feel that there was a sufficient enough breadth of offerings.
Yeah.
Linearly to connect themselves to characters on screen, whereas animation aligned with more possibility for interpretation and more possibility for identification. And so I wanted to hear about Malcolm X arrives at a time when we're at such a on the verge of such a beautiful bloom of Black cinema within the 90s as new queer cinema also surges in, and it's an incredible sort of independent film landscape. And I wanted to hear from you about where does kind of Malcolm X and this Denzel performance, does this sit among what you would consider a sort of rare field of possibilities for you to choose from? Or did you feel like you had a wealth of choices for whatever criteria was your sort of guiding light to making a choice?
I definitely did not. I drew a 24 to 36 hour blank, genuinely,
Yeah.
it was ongoing, and it was to the point where you have so much trouble thinking about it. You find yourself thinking about something else. You just it's not even ADHD. You just move on to what are you going to eat later? And you're like, wait a second, I need to be figuring this thing out. I think that the Bart Simpson one came to mind because it's young and playful. And, I hadn't even really thought about the way in which they're not true one-to-one characters because of, being a person of color. I think for me, it really just made me question what identification is. Even when I identify as Elwood and Turner in the Nickel Boys book, I'm what, is it because I recognize the race construction of them, or is it their daily life that I identify with? Is it what element of it do I really connect with? It's truly just the way that Colson wrote them, in that they're both cynical and optimistic about a social problem that I'm, deeply engaged with. That's the type of identification. And so, it's just as much about, what a person looks like, at least for myself, as what a person is thinking, because you're lacking that one-to-one.
The thing that made me want to just knowing that the movie has been out for some time now and it is still playing in theaters, people, you can still find this movie in a theater, Nickel Boys. I saw your speech, I believe it was at the DGA Awards, where you talked in receiving your award. I think it was best first time filmmaker, first narrative feature. Because you've obviously already made Hale County, about the scarcity of Black subjectivity in film. And I wanted to hear you expand on that so that me and anyone else could hear more of a sense of what that means and what you're thinking with that.
It's a really deep one that, deserves, essays and books. And, many people I think most things do, have approached it in I think other or more in the academic space. But I don't think specifically about subjectivity. People talk about gaze a lot when it comes to the image. I talk about representation, but I think that the subjectivity of the photograph and the subjectivity of film kind of fundamentally is Eurocentric,
Right. Yeah.
right? And like, what does that mean though? Like, what do you mean? Isn't the photograph neutral? Like, isn't it just a technology? But like every technology is born
I mean,
into
not
a
unless the
zeitgeist.
technology took the picture itself. Like, unless the technology became autonomous and decided right there, right now, no.
Hallelujah, and that's the point. It's like it's being wielded by an unconscious relationship to people. Like it's reproducing whatever values of culture in its interpretation and in its intention of the finger press and the directionality of it. Like it's anthropologic. Like these are the foundations of every person across America coming in contact with every person across from other countries that you didn't go visit yourself. It was National Geographic. It was people taking the camera with a very specific Enlightenment era of third world rationality, whatever you want to say, and producing knowledge that doesn't seem like it's knowledge because it's just a picture, but like what is interpreting that? And the connection between those two, I think, is fundamentally the subjectivity of the white culture. The subjectivity of the films that we watch every day in which you read the long lines and none of them say this is a white film.
Right.
Never seen anything about a white film. But every film that is a black film, a quote unquote black film, is a black film.
Yeah. A
Why
white
is
family in a white town struggles economically. Like playing next year at Sundance.
that? Yeah. It should have like White Home Improvement. That should have been called if the television show. It should have been called White Friends from New York.
Yeah.
Like
White Step by
anything.
Step.
Yeah. Like that would be accurate. Like if you're gonna call me black, then you're gonna be white.
Yeah.
Why are you not white? And then when I call you white, you're like, whoa. I'm just a person, And that's what I mean by like the fundamentals of it aren't black. And so then how do you make an image that is authored explicitly in black subjectivity, or at least to feel that way? And the only parallels I have are jazz and literature, in
Sure.
which you read something or you listen to something and you know it comes from a different world.
It's time for a break, but we will be right back with RaMell Ross, and I will have one quick thing before I go about, we're going way off topic again from the conversation, but the season 3 premiere of Reacher is on the way. So I'm just going to get excited about that at the end. Stick around.
Hey there. Do you like books about various shades of gray?
Maybe 50 of them? Or books about winged men searching for soulmates?
Is your e-reader full of stories that would pair well with Barry White in the background?
We're Bria and Mallory of Reading Glasses, and we have a brand new show for people who crave reads with just a dash of sriracha sauce.
That's right. Every other Friday, we dive into books that can be measured on the Scoville scale and talk to the people who love them.
You can find our new show by visiting MaximumFun.org/spicy. That's MaximumFun.org/spicy.
Hello, Internet. I'm your husband host, Travis McElroy.
And I'm your wife host, Teresa McElroy.
And this is a promo for Schmanners.
It's extraordinary etiquette.
For ordinary occasions. Every week, we're going to tell you about a bit of culture, a bit of history, how etiquette still applies in the modern day, all that stuff.
We also love to do biographies and histories of, and, general procedurals, how to do etiquette in today's society.
So, come check it out every Friday on MaximumFun.org or wherever you find your podcasts.
Manners schmanners. Get it?
Well, and to what you were saying, like with your focus on the South, and like a thing that stuck out in this time of watching Malcolm X for me was when he shows up he comes from Boston and goes down to he comes into the city basically, and he is zoot suited out, and him and Shorty, little Spike Lee, show up. Yeah, the walk down the street. And he is by this sort of feared contingent of an ever incredible Delroy Lindo as West Indian Archie. They see him in the bar that they're at, and he's wearing a brightly colored zoot suit, and he immediately starts drawing the wrong kind of attention.
You bullshitting me or what?
First thing my father ever taught me was you never bullshit a West Indian bullshit artist.
Your daddy is West Indian?
My mama. She from Grenada.
Grenada. I like this guy. Yeah, I like you, country. Grenada.
Yeah, but man, where did you get them goddamn vines you got on?
And them shoes? Oh, my. Well, maybe we can do something about that.
Yeah, but he's putting a hurting on my vision, man. Damn.
Relax now.
And they call him country. And they denigrate his flash. And they associate it with us. It seems like a sort of rural backwardness, like the countryman's idea of what a rich man looks like. And it's interesting to watch him as the Nation of Islam factualizes throughout the movie. Obviously, like, there are differences between him and his community, and there are differences between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King in terms of like what Black freedom should look like and Black liberation. But it seems like a first rift we see with him in his community is the contrast between a cosmopolitan and a country picture of a Black man, which is right.
Yeah, that's a really tough thing to be confronted with, I imagine, in the real world. I think what's also interesting about that moment is that's also within the criminal sphere, right? Because it's just as much about drawing attention to yourself when you're trying to not have attention to yourself so that you can do things that are, below the table, than it is the actual way in which you show wealth. Because the doctor, I imagine, or the actor would probably still show wealth in a way in which a little bit more flamboyant, because it becomes just part of Black culture to be a little bit more proud and a little bit more showboaty as a way to sort of boost up esteem when the larger system continues to sort of stifle it out. Man, that rural and urban dynamic like still exists. It's like it's just so interesting.
Well, that like and something too that I wondered about with like how old, do you know how old you were when you saw Malcolm X?
I have no idea, but you know what? I think separately, what interests me is also Spike Lee, because he validated the capacity for like sports to not equal daftness, and for like Jordan and the NBA to not mean that you can't be an actor, or you can't be interested in Michael Jordan and wear baggy clothes, but then also be a film director. Like all of that ability for change and complexity within Black culture, I think, is embodied in that director and character relationship. And I was like, He Got Game is an astounding movie. Like, I think that's why I have trouble even thinking about making a basketball movie. It's because, like, why would I ever?
Listen, Ex Machina exists, but I still want people to make robot movies about that are, what is it, Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick, Between Two Men. It's just like about two men talking about a woman kind of thing. Like, but I still want people to make robot cinema. I still want you to make a basketball movie.
Talk about a banger, man. Yeah, I don't know how old I was when I saw Malcolm X, but I think I was probably high school or a little bit younger.
That feels like a great time to be like that when you're so porous, and does the sensation of watching Spike have a specific distinction for you in terms of like you said, like walking through the RISD library, pulling some films? I don't know if you've seen the whole goddamn Criterion truck to know what movies mean, but like, does the experience of watching Spike have a unique feeling to you compared to other filmmakers?
I think so, but I think it's the older Spike.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think that those films felt distinctly Black in the way that, and distinctly complex in the way that music videos felt like actual short films that were doing Black culture in a visual way that allowed for people, at least myself, like on the streets, to be like a little bit more creative and a little bit more free flowing, and to think of ourselves as like dynamic individuals. For sure, I think that he embodied many of those elements, or still embodies many of those elements. It's so interesting to think about the evolution of this field. It's still, we know it's just so young, but we have yet to, I truly believe, like, consider the camera. Like, I think people, they consider the narrative. I think the narrative is where most people think the revolution is. And I think the revolution is the actual camera language itself,
Well, I think, and I have a question I wanted to ask specifically from like the point of view of somebody who's like, I'm a teacher, I'm happy with what, and like, you
Mhm.
know, it like Hale County, was it took so long. It was a
Yeah.
long, like lived in piece of documentary. And this was a movie that you took on the condition that you could do it in a way that you felt creatively autonomous.
Mhm.
As you know, but while still having so many collaborators, like it's still like there are producers, there are needs to be met here. Um, but otherwise being like, I am happy with my career in this wing of something that is not film production. It seems like what it kind of sucks for Spike Lee that like in the, you know, obviously Malcolm X can be criticized and Bell Hooks is really great. But it seemed like it's kind of like it seemed like he had reached that threshold by that time where she's essentially calling him an insider and
Mm.
working to satisfy the whims of a white system that has accepted him. And it feels like, is it possible for one to stay an outsider perspective once they've been in? Is it possible for one to maintain an autonomy once they've been accepted by a like a hegemonic majority? Like I wanted to hear from you about like the tension of like the wanting to remedy a dearth of Black subjectivity while also knowing that like you're operating within a system like puppeted by people who are an extension of the legacy of those responsible for like keeping Black subjectivity out of the point of view. Like what did you think
Yeah.
about that?
I do, and I have like I'm like not an absolutist, and I'm not a certaintist, if that's even a word. And
Mm-hmm.
like my question, even for myself, is that's like unnecessary burden. Whose problem is that? Is it a problem?
Mm.
You know, why can't I do both? You know, why should I like the difference between outsider and insider is like whose opinion, right? Like
Right.
I would say that what Spike Lee thinks that he's doing and what Spike Lee was doing was deeply outsider, you know? So you have a different version of an outsider. Your outsider is more towards the what you're doing in your field, and then critiquing mine from the outside. You know, like really complicated. I personally am just like for freedom of the individual. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think when we're not having conversations around Black artists having to be in these positions, then we've made progress. But until we haven't, then we're like, of course, we're overburdening the artist with trying to be the singular agent of change when most of the people that are making the critiques are doing no change at all themselves, aside from talking about other people, not staying true to themselves. How are you going to tell me that I'm not staying true to myself because I decided to do a more commercial film? You know, like maybe I'm trying something out in this film that's going to help me for maybe I'm not. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's like really, I love the conversation because it's rich and it actually makes people figure out what they care about and
Mm.
are they caring about the right things. And it's a mirror, of course, but boy, like I love that Barry Jenkins did Mufasa. You
Mm.
know, like
Mm-hmm.
I know a lot of people are like, why would Barry do Mufasa? I'm like, I don't know why he would, but I'm sure he has a good reason, and I'm gonna see it because I think Barry's a genius artist, and I'm here for whatever he does. You know, what do you think about it?
I will never I will never minimize the power of scale and
Mm,
the possibility that scale can present to other people who are aspiring to achieve. And so like
mhm.
I love a remake. I love horror. Like remix the same construct over and over again and give it to me. I want to see your interpretation. And like I remember when people were so angry that Robert Pattinson became Batman. And like
Really?
it was a day on the internet of like, oh, this is terrible. Like he's one of our best actors. Like, why this? What a waste of his abilities. And it was like, okay, first of all, you haven't seen this Batman. B, if you like Robert Pattinson so much, why don't you trust him to make his own
Why
decisions?
aren't you for it? Yeah.
If you believe in this guy and his ability and his curation of what he's done in his career so much, why? And it's like, yeah, but all the time that will take to make these movies, like think of the movies he won't make in the meantime. It's like, guys, I don't think Robert Pattinson is ever not going to work with Claire Denis. Like maybe his schedule will look a bit differently, but he's also not 98 years old. Like this guy's got time on the clock to dip out and do a franchise. And guess what? Mickey 17 by Bong Joon-ho is still coming out as he's talking about we're about to start filming Batman 2. So like
Yeah.
I think if you trust an artist and you love an art, you should probably think the reasons they made a decision for themselves are valid reasons.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's something like that people do that they don't realize they're doing, because I think people think, one, I think I maybe said this in the DJ thing, that people's imaginations are curated, and they don't even acknowledge it, nor do they really think that that's true, even when they really think about it. It's like hard to really put your mind around it, right? But like most of the ideas you have aren't yours. None of them really are, you know?
It's the cerulean sweater from Devil Wears Prada. It's the cerulean sweater.
Right, right. There's something like, I like to think like there's a whisper of self. You know, if you talk to neurobiologists, like they're like, hey guys, something activates in your head before you know it does, that tells you what to think and what to say. Can you account for your taste? Can you account for why you like something tastes the way it does? Why you like the color blue? You just like it. You're driven, my friend. You know, you are driven. You think you're driving, but you are driven. And that is something I think about when people make these comments about, oh, Robert Pattinson should do that, being like, there's a culture of whatever that's embedded themselves and is like painting the words of that voice, and the person's just saying the thing, thinking that they mean it. And even when they think about it, they can't really account for it. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just talking, you know? And it's like, it's really weird, you know?
Well, I want to keep asking you 1,000 different things. I have reached the end. I've reached the end of my time, so I have to stop. But I hope in this conversation we have driven people to go watch Nickel Boys, the Academy Award Best Picture nominated film that you directed. It's so beautiful, and it's
Thanks, Jordan.
special. And I wasn't prepared for how well its decision on point of view would work until I read you say in an interview that like it doesn't work till the very end. Like the movie, like you need the end for the whole movie to work. Yeah. And I was really like immersed in my experience, and it was entirely positive. And then it ended, and I was like, like the idea of never has a plant and payoff been more of a plant and payoff situation for all of its harrowing reality. But yeah, so thank you for your film, and thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks, Jordan. It was one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had about film in a very long time. And I want to let the audience know that they should consider themselves incepted. Yeah. And they will now go watch Nickel Boys and like it. You will like it.
You will like it. And if I ever get my dream of doing spin-off bonus content of villains, I'm going to find a representative, and you're the first person I'm reaching out to.
Please. I will not have to think long.
Thank you so much to RaMell Ross for a wonderful conversation. Again, you can watch Nickel Boys in a theater near you. It's still around there. I know it is. I've seen it. Or wherever you love to stream. It's very accessible. And now that one quick thing before I go. We don't gotta dwell on it, guys. Very long. I just gotta say, Jack Reacher's coming back. Alan Richson, the trademark Vice Victus Vanilla Gorilla, Tyrannosaurus Flex, coming back to a Prime streaming account near you. Guess what? He's solving crimes again. He's got more crimes to solve. There's a game is afoot. And who can crack the game but Jack Reacher, the intrepid former military investigator and big sexy man and gentleman and soldier with a code. This is some of the best television going. I hope Alan wants to, and I hope Prime wants him to do this for 10 seasons. I am so excited every time it comes back. This time, in this season, he fights a guy bigger than he is. They're like, make it a centerpiece of the trailer. Alan Richson fights a guy who is even more large than he is. And how can we not? I can't get enough of that. I give me the sight gag of it. Give me Jack being shocked he's not the hugest man in the room. Give me Jack having to figure out how to topple a man the size of a redwood when he rarely encounters anybody who could match his physical prowess. I think in Jack Reacher book, it describes that character at one point as having like fists the size of like each like a raw chicken, like a whole raw chicken. And that is like the scale of Alan Ritchson. So yeah, give me meathead crime solving. I'm stoked. Let's all gather round the TV set and hail the return of Alan Ritchson's Reacher. And in a recent GQ piece, he was out here saying that he like knows Matt Gaetz from growing up and was just really calling him a punk ass. And I like a quote from Alan Ritchson. I'm taking the risk of standing a man. It's a dangerous thing to do, as we know, as anybody who's spent any time on the internet, to stan a gentleman. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to take that risk for Alan Ritchson. But you know what? I'm putting my faith out there. And that's it. I love Jack Reacher. Alan Ritchson's great. RaMell Ross was an awesome conversation. And go watch Nickel Boys. Like, tie it up in a bow. There it is. That's the show. You can keep up with us wherever you get your podcasts. Hit that follow button wherever you are listening to get a new episode in your feed. I'm serious. It helps. Do it. You can also follow us on Instagram at Feeling Seen Pod. We are on Blue Sky. The show is. I am. You can search Feeling Seen or me at Jorcru, Jorcru, there and Twitter still. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. The show is produced by Thania Huesius. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows,
supported
directly
by you.